Hi everyone, welcome to our stitch guide for October. This month we're going to be exploring woven stitches. Now the principles of weaving I've already covered in a video back in July, and I'll link that in a card at the top of the screen. We're going to use some of those principles in the stitches we're going to look at this month. Now I've put in some fairly straightforward stitches, but we are quite a long way through the year now. And I know some of you are looking for a little bit of extra challenge, so I've put a couple in there that are really quite tricky. If that's beyond you, don't worry, just pretend they're not there. There is something for everybody in this video, so just focus on the ones that you feel confident with. Now, our first stitch is going to be a spider's web wheel, and we did do something like this in our weaving video. I'm starting with a circle and I've marked 12 points around the edge. It really doesn't matter how many points you have on this one. And I'm just going to make a series of spokes. So I've come up at the edge of the circle there, and I'm taking my needle back down at the centre, and I'm going to work my way around in that way, just coming up at the edge and going to the centre all the way around the markers on my circle, and it's going to create a set of spokes that we're going to use to weave. So to mark these spokes in, I just marked north, south, east and west, and then divided the space with 2 more markers, just like putting numbers on the face of a clock. So that's my last spoke in, and all I've got to really be aware of is that they're fairly evenly spaced. Now I'm going to bring my thread back up right at the centre, and I'm going to bring it out in between 12 and 1, because I'm going to use 12 as my starting point every time. Because I'm right-handed, I'm going to work anti-clockwise. If you're left-handed, you'll find it easier to work clockwise. I'm just going to work on the surface now. I'm going to take my needle underneath 12, and it does help if you sort of jiggle it side to side, it stops you catching your thread. I'm going to go under 12 and under 11 and bring my needle through, and then I'm going to go back over 11 and take my needle under 11 and under 10 and pull through. Then I'm going to go back over 10 and come through under 10 and 9, and then back over 9 and come through under 9 and number 8. Then we go back over 8 and under 8 and 7. So I'm always going back over 1 and forward under 2. And what we're doing then is sort of wrapping each thread. And I'm just going to keep working my way around like that. And when I get back to 12, I just carry on and make as many circuits as I need to. And you should be able to see quite quickly the effect that is created. Because we're wrapping our threads, we're creating this series of raised spokes that radiate outwards. Now I've run out of thread, so I've brought my needle through to 12, and I'm going to take my needle back over 12 and take it back through the fabric, and I'm sort of angling my needle down and under the threads I've already stitched so that the end is hidden. Take my needle back through to the back, and then I can secure that thread on the back, and you can see really clearly here the raised effect that we get. So I've got my new thread now. I've threaded up some pink. You can carry on in the same colour, but it's quite nice to use different colours as well. So we've wrapped that number 12 thread, so I'm bringing my needle up just to the left of it, and again I'm angling my needle up and out so that I'm coming out, and I'm going to take it under 11, because if we had carried on with the same colour, we'd already gone back over 12. The next place our needle would have come out would have been between 11 and 10. So I'm just mimicking that really. So I'm imagining where my needle would have come out if I'd just carried on. So now I can go back over 11 and under 11 and 10, back over 10, under 10 and 9, and I just carry on the same way. So that's how you change threads if you run out or if you want to change colour. I'm back to the start now. I've added in a layer of grey and a layer of blue, and to finish off I just remember where I started, which was at that number 12, and I've taken my needle back through again to the back, and I can secure the thread, and you can see it just creates the most lovely effect of these radiating spokes. I love this stitch. So our next stitch is a woven wheel, and the principles are pretty similar. We're going to start with a series of spokes, but for this one it's really important that you have an odd number of spokes. So I've put in 9 here, and I just simply marked thirds and then rotated round a little bit and marked another set of thirds and then put in a final set of thirds. So I didn't measure this, I just eyeballed it. And again, we start off by creating our series of spokes. So I'm starting at the top again, taking my needle down at the centre, and then I'm just going to work my way around and put those spokes in. Now this one is a stitch where you can really play around with the threads that you use. So what I'm going to do is thread all 3 of my colours into my needle at the same time. So I've got a strand of blue, pink and grey, and I've knotted them all together at the bottom. So now I'm just going to start at the centre, so I'm bringing my thread up through that centre, and this time I'm just going to simply work under and over. So I'm again working anti-clockwise because I'm right-handed. So I start by going under my top stitch, over and under, and pull through, and I'm always sort of pulling away from the direction I'm going in. So then I go over, under, over, under. Now if we had an even number of spokes, I would go over, under, over, and then when I was back at the start I'd be going under again, and my stitches would always line up in the same way. But what we want is for them to be offset, and that's where the odd number of spokes comes in. So next time when I go round, I'm actually going to be going over my starting stitch. So let's just see it in action. I'm going over, under, and now I'm going over, which is the reverse of what I did the first time. So my first stitch was going under first time round, and this time it's going to go over. And so all my stitches are going to be the opposite of what I've just done. I go over my starting stitch, under, and then work my way around again. And I just keep doing that until my wheel is full. If you run out of thread, you handle it in pretty much the same way. So just remember where you're finishing off and take your thread back through to the reverse of your fabric and secure it, and then come up just the other side of the stitch you went through under. So I'll show you that in action here. I'm finishing on the thread that's close to the bottom, and I'm just going to take my needle down just to the left of that thread, angling it underneath the stitches. I can secure that on the back, and I just need to remember the stitch that I've gone down on. You could either put a pin in or just mark it with a heat erase pen. So now I've got my new set of threads threaded up, and that thread has gone under, and I'm just bringing my needle up at this point just to the right of that spoke, and that will look like the thread has passed underneath it. So bring my thread out and carry on as if nothing happened. I'll just then work my way to the edge. Now with these woven wheels, when you get close to the edge, it does get quite tricky to get your needle under, but you just need to angle it. And to finish off, I'm going back to the starting point and taking my needle down and again angling it into the woven wheel, and I pull that through to the back, and that's my stitch. And if I just take it out of the frame, you and just manoeuvre it around, you should be able to see just quite how raised it is. It's much more raised than my spider's web wheel. It's a really bulky stitch. So our next stitch is needle weaving, and this is basically a darning technique, and we need to create some warp threads, those vertical threads that we're going to weave under. And I like this one because you can basically do it in any shape. So I'm going to show you how to follow a shape with this one, and I'm going to start off by putting it in some vertical threads that come up at the edge of the circle and go down at the edge of the circle. So I've made my first bar there, and then I'm just going to move my needle slightly to the left around the circle like that, and then make my next stitch so that they sit next to each other, and then I move a little way around the circle again. And you can, if you're worried about getting the angles right, getting them straight, you can lay your thread on the fabric as a guide to where you want your stitch to sit, and then take your needle down just at the end. And we just keep repeating this process. So I'm sort of creating a ladder. I'm going down, across, up, across, down, across, up, across. And so that's what I'm just going to do all the way across the circle. Now you can see I've left too big a gap there, just on my previous bar. And if you notice that you've got an uneven spacing, you can always go back and put in a stitch that you've missed. I'm just going to put in this missing bar, and that's a lot more even. They're not perfectly even. I am working at a strange angle here, but it won't actually matter too much. So I'm just putting in my last warp thread here, and I can secure that on the back. You want them fairly taut, but not so tight that it's going to be difficult to get your needle underneath. So now I've got a weft thread, so I've got a pink here that I'm going to bring up at the top. I'm going to go over, under, and then over the next one, and then take my needle back down on the outer edge of my shape and pull through. So then I need to move my pink thread down. So we're just doing almost the same as we did putting in our weft threads, following the line of the circle and doing our horizontals. We're just adding the step of weaving. I just need to make sure that I am reversing my pattern on the next row. So that first stitch that I've lifted up, I went over it on my first pass from right to left. So this time I'm making sure I'm going under it. And again, I just do an over, under, and then take my needle back down on the edge of my shape. And I'm just pushing those threads up with my needle there. So now I'll come down a little way on the outside edge of the circle. I went under that first stitch the last time, so this time I want to go over it, and that guides me across. So under, over until I'm at the outside edge, and then I push my threads up and pack them together, and then I can take my stitch down at the edge of the circle, and you should be able to see that it's actually forming quite a neat circular shape. You'll see it better when there's more woven stitches in. So these stitches I'm putting quite close together. I'm packing them quite close together to get quite a dense effect, but I'll show you, I'll do different effects as I'm filling this circle in and show you what it looks like if you space them out a little bit more. And I'm going to play with colour a little bit so that you can see the different effects of different colours. So again, just under, over, reversing what I did on the previous pass. So I'm just finishing off now. I'm just down right to the bottom of the circle, and I just do my last line, take my thread through to the back and secure it. So this is a selection of different effects. I really like the way this looks. So you can see I put some quite dense stitching to start off with, and then I space them out a little bit more. You can actually see a little bit of the fabric through. It looks more like a basket or brickwork. I think that looks really nice. And that's with a high contrast thread, so quite a strong colour. And I wove in some silver thread, grey thread, and that's a far more subtle look. And then I thought it might be nice for you to see at the bottom what it would look like if I wove with the same colour thread that I use for my warp threads. And that's just it looks like quite densely packed. It's quite a nice effect, so you can really play around and get very different looks depending on the thread you choose and the spacing of your stitches. It's a great one for covering holes, mending clothes, that sort of thing. It's just a great darning stitch. So our next stitch is a really interesting one. This is called a woven picot, and you can see I've put in some dots. So I've got 3 dots horizontally at the bottom and then a dot above the middle dot at the base. For this one I need an extra little tool, and that's simply a pin. So I'm going to take my pin down at the top dot and I'm going to bring it back out at the dot directly below it, and I'm just going to leave it in there. I'm going to do 2 of these, so I might as well just put my second pin in place just before we get started. So now we're going to create some warp threads, because we're going to weave this in a similar way to the woven circle that we've just done. So I'm going to bring my needle up on that left hand bottom dot, and then I'm going to wrap my thread underneath my pin head. So I've just taken it over the top there and tucked it under the pin head, and I'm taking my thread back down on that right hand dot. So we've got a little V shape that's held in place by the pin. Now I'm going to bring my thread up at the bottom centre dot where the pin comes out and loop it around the pin head again, and then we've created 3 warp threads effectively. And it's simple weaving now, so I'm going to go under the right hand thread, over the centre and under the left, and every time I'm working right to left, that's what I'm going to do, under, over, under. And I'm pulling the thread up to just make sure it's packed fairly tightly. So now I'm working left to right, and I go over, under, over, which is the reverse of what I've just done, working right to left. And again, pull the thread up and it packs it nice and tight. So under, over, under, going right to left, and then over, under, over, working left to right. And I just keep going in that way all the way down to the bottom. Now you don't want to pull too tight because you don't want to distort the shape, but you do need to pull it a little bit so that the stitch is packed together. So I'm right down at the bottom now, just doing right to left and then left to right. Rather than weaving back, I've filled in the bottom. I'm going to take my needle down, back through the fabric at that centre dot, like that. Now when I take the pin out, we get a little bit of magic, because what I've created is a stitch that sits free of the fabric. And this is a great one for making petals, sun rays, and you can move it around, so you could stitch them in place, you could twist it, you could curve it in a particular direction, you can tuck it under itself and make a sort of roll on the surface of your fabric. This one would be a great one for ferns or something like that, fern leaves. It's just a lovely versatile stitch, really fun one to know. So I'm just going to demo that again. So I've got my pin in place, bring my thread up on the left dot at the base, take it underneath my pin head and down on the right hand dot, then bring it up again at the centre dot, wrap under the pin head again, and then start weaving. So under, over, working right to left, and over, under, over, working left to right, and just fill in the stitch, weaving backwards and forwards just like that. And again, it gets quite a little bit tricky at the bottom, just you have to play with the angles of your needle. Take it down at the centre dot and secure it on the back, and then we've got our lovely woven picot. Really fun stitch that you can do all sorts of things with. So now we're getting into our more technical stitches, and the first one I'm going to show you is a diagonal woven band. I'm not sure why I chose this one first, but it's actually more tricky than the next stitch that I'm going to show you. But we're going to start off by making a ladder. So I've brought my needle up there on the left hand line, and I'm just taking it directly across to the right and taking my needle back down. Then I come down a little way on that right hand line and cross back to the left, and we're just making a series of horizontal parallel lines by just zigzagging backwards and forwards. We want these to be fairly evenly spaced. It doesn't have to be mathematically precise, but fairly even is what we're going for. So for this one I need 2 threads, so I've got a pink thread ready and a blue thread, and we're going to use these to weave in and out of our ladder. So I'm going to start by bringing up the blue thread on just above that first bar there, and I'm going to bring my pink thread up just above the second bar. And you can get into a bit of a tangle with this one, so I'm using the spare fabric in my hoop to just anchor my needles while I'm working. So our first thread is going to slide. I'm using the eye end of my needle to save catching the thread. I'm sliding it under that second bar, just next to where the pink's coming out. And then I take my pink thread and I'm going to slide it underneath my third bar. So my blue thread is going to go underneath all the even numbered bars, and the pink is going to go under all the odd numbered bars. So I've got my blue down through underneath bar 4, and the pink is going to go underneath bar 5. Back to the blue, that's going to go underneath bar 6, and you can see I'm taking my threads off to the left and just making sure they're always going off to the left, because I want each thread to go over the top of the previous one. So blues underneath all the even numbered bars and pink underneath all the odd numbered bars. And then when I get to the bottom of my ladder, I'm going to take both threads through to the back and secure them off. That's the blue, just untangling there, and I can take the pink back through as well. And I'll secure those on the back and cut them off and then restart. You can see I'm securing on the front to save me having to keep manoeuvring my hoop backwards and forwards. And hopefully you can see there that there's a sort of candy stripe effect that's starting to happen. This one's quite magical, this stitch. So this time we're going to do exactly the same thing, but we're going to reverse our stitches. So I started with the blue before, I'm starting with the pink now, and I've brought that up at the top just above that first bar, and then I bring my blue up just below the second bar, and I repeat the process, but this time my pink thread is going to go under the even numbered bars. So I'm taking it underneath bar 2, and it's going off to the left, and then my blue is going to go under the odd numbered bars, so that's going under bar 3 and off to the left. And you should be able to see quite quickly the effect that is created. So it's not a quick one, this one, it's going to take some time, but we just weave our way back down. At the bottom, we take our threads through to the back and secure them. And then we start the process again, and we're back to our first arrangement. So I'm bringing my blue thread up at the top line, and then my pink thread up at the second line. We're keeping really nicely tucked in to the vertical that we've just done. And so now we're back to the blue being our even numbered thread, so underneath bar 2, and the pink goes underneath bar 3. Blue under bar 4, pink under bar 5, and we work our way down. And we just keep going like that, alternating the arrangement of threads all the way across. So I'm on my fourth line now, I'm back to the pink being my starting point, and I've woven it all in, and you can see that we get this lovely densely woven bar, and we've created diagonal stripes. It's so clever, it's like magic. So that is a woven bar that operates on diagonals. Really fun. Now we're going to do something very similar, but this time we're going to create horizontal stripes rather than diagonal stripes. So we're going to start in the same way, stitching a series of horizontal bars in exactly the same way. I'm using pink this time for my bars. And I've got my 2 threads again, and my blue is going to come up on my top line and my pink is coming up on my second line. And we do exactly the same thing that we did before. So my blue is going under bar 2, and my pink is going under bar 3, and my blue goes under all the even numbered bars, and the pink goes under all the odd numbered bars. We work all the way down to the bottom and take our threads through to the back and secure them. Now this time, rather than alternating, we're just going to do exactly the same again. We're going to repeat what we've just done exactly. So blue comes up at the top bar, pink comes up at the second bar, and my blue is always right the way across going to be my even numbered colour, and the pink is going to be the odd colour. And we just keep repeating that, and you can already see that this time, instead of getting that candy stripe, what we're going to get is a series of horizontal bars. Now I could have done with doing another few lines here to stop it bowing in at the centre, but I thought it was enough so that you could see the principle. So we've got those lovely vertical stripes of turn. So that's a woven band. Now this is a real head scratcher, this stitch. It's not an easy one, so if you are not ready for this level of challenge, don't worry about it. We're going to do an interwoven herringbone band, and we're going to start off with herringbone stitch, but we are going to do something slightly different with this one. So we start a herringbone stitch in the usual way. I'm using this grey thread, so I've gone diagonally down, done my little back stitch, and diagonally up. And if we were doing normal herringbone stitch, we'd carry on exactly the same way. But now we covered herringbone stitch back in June when we were doing our decorative lines, and I will link that video at the top of the screen. But we are going to do something slightly different. This time we want to interweave. So what I'm going to do is take my needle underneath that upward diagonal stitch, so that it then crosses over, and then I'll do my bottom stitch in the usual way. So diagonally down, a little back stitch, and then diagonally up, and my little back stitch. And again, I'm going to take my needle underneath that diagonal bar that I've just sewn. And I just work like that all the way along. So when I'm going up, diagonally up, I go over, and when I'm coming diagonally down, I go under the previous stitch. And you can see I've started and finished in the centre of my 2 horizontal lines there. So now we're going to add a second line, and we want to offset. So we want our top stitches to be directly above the bottom grey stitches. So I'm using a second colour here, some pink, and this time we want to go underneath. We're going to interweave with the line of herringbone stitch that we've just done. So you can see I've just taken my needle underneath that first herringbone stitch, and this time we're going to go under on the way down. So I've put in my little back stitch, and then I've taken my needle under that first diagonal herringbone stitch, and then I'm going to make my little back stitch at the bottom. I've gone over the grey there, and on the way up I want to go over my pink but underneath the grey up to the top. Put in my little back stitch, and again I'm going under the pink and over the grey. So my back stitch on the bottom line, and I'm going to go over the pink and under the grey. Put in my back stitch, and then we want to go under the pink and over the grey. So when we're going up, we go over pink and under grey, and when we go down, we're going over grey and under pink. I think this looks lovely just as it is. I think it just looks really pretty with them all weaving into each other there. But we're going to add a third colour, and this is where, if you thought that was tricky, this is where it gets really very challenging indeed. So I hope I'm going to be able to explain this in a way that makes sense. I'm just going to finish off my thread by going underneath that grey, just like I would have done, and securing my thread on the back there over on the right hand side. So now I've got my third colour, and we're going to make a series of woven loops along our line of herringbone stitch. So we're going to work left to right, and then we're going to work back on ourselves and work right to left. So as we're working left to right, we're going to weave around the top half of our herringbone stitch. So I've brought my needle up just below that pink thread, and I'm going to take it over the grey and under the pink there, and pull it up, and so you can see it's now a diagonal line in between the pink and grey line. So I want to follow that angle of the pink, and I want to slide my needle through that V at the top, working diagonally down to the left. And now I've got 3 bars, and I want to go over that pink and under the blue that I'm stitching with, like that. And it's sort of created a loop around the top part of that diamond in the centre. I also want to go underneath the grey. So I'm just taking my needle back through there. So you can see I've made a loop that weaves around the threads that form that herringbone stitch. So now I'm going to go back up by going over the pink and under the silver. And again, I want to come diagonally down through the V at the top of the stitch. I've got my 3 bars here, silver, blue and pink. And I want to go over the first thread and under the next 2. Like that. So now I'm working up diagonally. I want to go over and then under. Then I'm going to come down through the V. And then I want to go over my first thread and under the next 2. Working diagonally down to the right and pull round. And we work like this all the way along. So over, under, down through the V, and then over the first thread and under the next two. Over, under, down through the V, over the first thread and under the next two, and we just repeat that all the way along until we get to the end. So we've got that series of loops worked along the top half of our line of interwoven herringbone stitch now. So what we're going to do now is work back from right to left to put in some matching loops on the bottom half. So we're going to notice that little cross at the right hand side. We're going to go up under the line that's at the top of the cross. It's pink on mine, and we're just going to pull it through. We've got 3 bars, so we go over that grey thread and under the next 2, like that. So it will depend what colour you've got. So I'm going over the grey and under the blue and the pink and pull through. And this time we want to go up under the V, so we're pointing our needle up to the top right, coming up through that V. And now we've got 4 threads at the centre there. We've got a pink, we've got 2 blues and a grey. I want to go over, under, working over those 4 threads and pull through like that. And that's my first herringbone covered. So now I've got 3 threads again. I've got the pink, blue and silver. I'm going to go over the pink and under the next 2 and pull through. I'm going to go up through my V, and then I've got a grey, 2 blues and a pink, so I'll go over, under and pull through. I've got grey, blue and pink, so I'll go over the first thread and down through the next 2, over the first colour and under the next 2 threads. Then I go up through my V. I've got my 4 threads in the centre again, so I'll go over, under and pull through. So now I'm going down, so over the first thread and under the next 2. You can see we're making a sort of crisscross arrangement in the centre there. Up through my V, and then I've got 4 threads, silver, blue, blue, pink, so I'll go over, under, and then coming back down I go over, under. I've run out of thread, so I've taken it back down to the back just at the V there and start a new thread. So I come up through my V and then go over, under, and I work like that all the way along, just trying to get it really close so that you can see the threads as clearly as possible. Sorry if it's a bit grainy, I've had to zoom it right in here. So I'm pushing my camera to the limit. So you can see the 3 threads there. I've got the pink, the blue and the grey. So over the pink, under the blue and grey. And then up through the V. And we just come out in that open space just to the right of the herringbone stitch. And then hopefully you can see here that there are the 4 threads. So I've got that grey, the 2 blues and the pink. So I'm going to go over the grey, under the first blue, over the second blue and under the pink. And pull through like that, and then we go over, under, working our way back down, up through the V, going out in the open space to the right of it, and then we've got our 4 threads there again. So we're going to go over, under, So that's an Interwoven Herringbone Band. So I hope you've enjoyed that. Some very different stitches, a very different approach to anything we've done so far. So that's what we're going to be exploring through October. Have lots of fun practicing, and I will see you in our first October video. Bye!